is December 1st, 2014, and I'm talking about some of the different things that happened with government plotting to have me raped and tortured and stealing from me at the same time. But I was just mentioning something about the twin Bobs, but what I think is that there are triplets. So I don't want to focus on just that there are only two, because I'm pretty sure that I think there was one time where I did see 3 of them who were identical. And about the Dixies, I mentioned that I saw 3 of them at one time. It was at a NASA owned site. But there was another time, I'm pretty sure that I saw all 3 of them. And I think it was underground. Like they were all being hidden in a, kind of like under a cellar trap door type of a thing. And they all looked alike. And I might be wrong about that, because it's more vague memory. But I don't remember it being like some other individuals or some other girls. I remember that it was more like Dixies getting swapped back and forth, and there was this underground passage and containment place where they were being held as they were one was being taken in and the other one taken out. So and you know, who was bringing them back and forth? From what I remember, it was some kind of a cop, like FBI or cop or some government official person. And and I don't remember very much else except for that, because I think that it's a vague, sort of a fuzzy memory, because I think they doped me up right after I saw that, because I got scared. And they were doping me up a lot. You know, they were coming in with me, you know, it was all the time. You know, next thing I knew, I was getting a syringe in my neck or in the back of the shoulder. Typically, do it right about here, you know, or here. It wasn't too hard. I just come up behind you and stab you. It was, and that happened in England too. And when I said that, you know, maybe it wasn't all fun and games, it was maybe more like all games and no fun. Because I don't really remember fun times over there. I remember times that I was desperately trying to please people, and a few times I got rewarded for small things. But it wasn't fun. And one time I was out in the public with royals, like kind of off to the side, supposedly just one of the public. And I was kind of going with a Bob Jr. out there at the time. He was out there with me, and we were off to the side like we weren't there at all. But the British royals were out in the public doing some sort of presentation or meeting the crowds for something. And while I was out there, I was getting targeted. I was getting tortured, like by remote means, from a distance. And I was being told, you know, to pretend like nothing was happening. I couldn't react. I couldn't scream or act like I was hurting or start crying, because I was out there in the public eye. And then someone said, "You see why you will never be a royal," something like that. And I think possibly it's because I had so much. I think they can torture you even if you don't have certain kinds of technology or microchips or metal plates and that kind of thing in your body to facilitate it. I think a person can probably still get tortured, but it's much, much, much easier for governments to torture someone who they've done multiple surgeries on and, rigged their whole bodies up to facilitate extreme forms of torture. And I was getting experimented on over in England. The Middletons were part of that. They had me under observation to see what my threshold of pain was, how much torture I could withstand, and how much would break me down. And, it wasn't to be a spy for them. It was just sort of to figure out how to control me because they were stealing from me. And in the dentist place in Soap Lake, that's where I remember being. It took like a half an hour to get there from my house in Moses Lake. And I remember hearing that it was Soap Lake. Could be wrong. It could have been some other place now and then. That's possible. But from my memory, I remember some sort of dentist office in Soap Lake. And they also had a Robert Guy Garrett in Ephrata or Soap Lake who just had that name, but he didn't look like them. But supposedly he just had this name, which is kind of weird. Probably just another government cover type of a thing. And when I was in those dentist offices, one time Gary Goldsmith was there and Mike Middleton showed up. And another time some guy from Boston, Massachusetts showed up. Had flown over for the event. And they also wanted certain relatives to be present sometimes for things done. But I really didn't see the Middletons set foot on U.S. soil around me specifically that many times. It was more it was a few times that I do recall, and it was very secretive. And at the time I didn't know it was secretive, because I just figured just walk in, walk out, and it wasn't a big deal. But then later, as time went on and realized how much people were lying about everything, I realized, okay, well, everyone must have been hiding, to go back and forth and be involved with me at all. But most of the time when I saw them, it was on their turf or in Canada. A couple of times in Canada, because Canada happened to be sometimes a in-between place where they would, the U.S. would traffic a kid over to Canada, and then Canada would traffic them out by one of their airports to another country. Fly you back and forth. So anyway, that's a little bit of just sort of miscellaneous information to help clear up some of the things that I misstated possibly in my earlier explanations, and about how the United States and other countries wanted me to look basically like trash, and they wanted to facilitate hate crimes of rape against me repeatedly. And I will have to think about what I'm going to talk about next with regard to the forms of rape that were used against me and what they were doing. But in general, so far as you can see, I described the United States government coordinating rape of me from a standing position, where I was with a certain sequence of cues where I was expected to do blowjobs, and from a seated position where I was expected to do something for them in a car, which they practiced with a lot of different kinds of elevated chairs in different government buildings. And while I was lying down, and in a couple of different situations where I was lying down, for example, one where I'm not in a bed and they're fully clothed and have pants on with zippers, typically. And then another situations that they practiced was if I was in a bed and people had night clothes on, and how to thwart me from escaping a rape attempt and force me to accept it. And that involved that telephone ringing business. And then in addition to that, they were using another set of triggers involving sometimes making comments about, I have a wife or I have a girlfriend. And what the Middle Eastern group was doing that they were laughing about, that was so hilarious. They kept making me repeat this over and over. They'd say, I have a girlfriend, and then they were forcing me to look more and more excited and try to pursue the man even more. And if I didn't, they were torturing me with electric shock. So they'd say, I have a girlfriend. And then they started expecting me to say, no, you need to act more excited. We want you to jump on us, throw yourself at us. And I think that's maybe what my dad was getting mad about. Or one of these Bob Juniors. Who knows? I mean, maybe he was mad about something else. It didn't really have anything to do with me. Or maybe he was mad at me. I didn't really think so at that time. But they forced me to practice that, not just like one time at my house. They came back a few times and practiced that, and that was after they had done that repeatedly, trying to drill that into my brain when I was a little girl, even younger, I mean. You know, for example, not between the age of 8 and 11, or 8 and 10 or so, 8 and 11 maybe, but more like between the ages of, 8 and younger, toddler and older. But I was being forced to routinely repeat this over and over, and then they'd electrocute me with the head brace, the electrocution box, and then they'd take it off and they'd say, okay, now come on, you can do a better job than that. And basically it was, all of this coaching for me to look like I was the one throwing myself at these people who hated my guts. So this is all, these are all things that the United States government was practicing against me. And they were hate crimes. And they coordinated this extensively, and they need to be held accountable for it. And they've kidnapped my son without cause and adopted him out from me by fraud. There is no genuine reason to have him adopted from me or to have ever taken him in the first place. But they always promised me that they were going to torture me and then call me crazy and get away with it.